Our scripture reading this morning comes from Matthew chapter 5, verses 31 through 37. It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, makes her the victim of adultery, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, do not break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you have made. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. This is the word of the Lord.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here. My name's Riley. I'm the preaching minister here. I do want to make reference to something that Bill mentioned earlier. He talked about Views from the Ridge. That is the clever name for our weekly newsletter. If any of you are looking to stay on top of any of the events that are happening around campus, that's where the majority of our communications comes out, and that's also where we'll send out a short message to help you engage further with the sermon topic for the week. If that is at all of any interest to you, please come and find me, and we will make sure that that finds its way to you. And if you are new with us or you haven't been here in a while, we are currently going through a series on the Sermon on the Mount, a collection of Jesus' teachings that is found at the beginning of the Gospel of Matthew, the chapters 5, 6, and 7. And in these chapters, you'll find some of Jesus' most difficult teachings for his followers. Another Sunday, another uncomfortable topic this morning. I warned you going into it, there were some things in the Sermon on the Mount that were just going to rattle us, to bring some discomfort. But I think that's the point. I think that we are supposed to kind of keep chewing on it. I think this is supposed to stick in our minds and bother us a little bit. And I think that as we, like the disciples, come down off the mountain and re-enter daily life, I think we are supposed to have the words of Jesus still ringing in our ears. So today, we are going to talk about the commitments that we make to God and that we make to each other. But before we begin, please join me in prayer. Father, what we know not, teach us. What we have not, give us. What we are not, make us. For your Son's sake. Amen. Now, I noticed a really fun kind of pattern in college. College is a really good time to study sociology, not in an official capacity, but you just learn a lot by watching people in college. And every now and then, I would try to make plans over the weekend, go to dinner or have some friends over, something like that. And whenever you invited someone to join you for really anything in college, you would get a very predictable answer. It would be something like, yeah, I might do that. I might be able to do that. Or, yeah, maybe, I'll let you know. Which provided me, the inviter, with zero new information about the situation. It took me a little while to figure out what was happening, but I especially learned that I would actually do the same thing too. Whenever someone would ask me to make plans, I would kind of hedge, not really come down one way or the other. Not because I didn't like the plan, and it's not because I didn't like the person who was inviting me. It was because there was always so much that was happening on campus. There's always so much going on. And we wanted to reserve the ability to go do something that strikes us as more enjoyable, more fun, with people that we like more. So when you ask someone for a commitment and you get a maybe, that was their way of kind of keeping the options open. Because when you say yes to something, you also say no to like 1,000 other things. Ronald Rollheiser said that every choice is 1,000 renunciations. When we choose something, when we commit, we're actually giving up a whole bunch of maybes for that one yes. Which is why commitments don't come very easy nowadays. The situation I've described isn't unique to college campuses. I know you know this. Especially now in the world of social media, of digital invites and RSVPs, of being able to see the hundreds of parties and events and trips that you are missing out on. Why commit yourself one direction when there are so many ways to spend our time? And it's really easy to cancel plans, to back out, to tell a little white lie that something important came up, or that family is in town, that your dog has swim lessons, something like that. I bring up this discussion on commitment for a reason. When you look through commentaries that go over the Sermon on the Mount, they're a little bit divided on what do you do with this short little teaching on divorce. Some people think that Jesus transitions to talking about divorce right after he talks about adultery. The two kind of go together. They're working as one unit. Jesus is kind of talking about the sanctity of marriage and nothing else. And other people are going to say that he actually introduces this topic of divorce to transition into the topic that follows, the one with oaths, with keeping your word. You've heard me say it before. You are welcome to walk away with your own interpretation. It's entirely possible that both are true to an extent, and the teaching on divorce is kind of a bridge between one and the other. But I think I personally tend to put my weight a little more in the second camp. More on that in a second. We need to get some things on the table before we go any further. A little bit about me. I am a man who has been married for just a little more than 2 years now. And I am not nearly arrogant enough to think that I have all that much to teach any of you about marriage. I do have roughly 2 more years' experience than Jesus on the topic, so there's that. Here's my point. I am fully aware that I have a very limited perspective on the matter of marriage. I know what it is like to be myself married to my wife for this amount of time in this specific context. I don't know what it's like to be a woman in a marriage. I don't know what it's like to be married for 5, 10, 25, 50 years. I don't know anything about many of the challenges that a lot of you have walked through in your marriages. And I don't want you to hear today's sermon coming from a place of pride or self-arrogance. Self-righteousness, anything like that. And we also need to acknowledge some really hard truths about this passage itself. This is one of the most explicit things that Jesus ever says about marriage. And it does sound very clear-cut. Don't get a divorce except for this one specific circumstance. But we have to acknowledge that there have been times and places that this passage has been used for harm. This passage has been used to cover up and even excuse abuse in marriages. This passage has historically been used to control people, especially women who are in unsafe marriages, because to leave would be to disobey Jesus himself, or so the counsel goes. This passage has been used as an excuse to demonize and insult and exclude people who are walking through one of the most painful experiences that this life has to offer. I don't say this to tell you that we can just set it aside and ignore it. I say this so that we remember there's a very real human cost to how we read and interpret and teach and talk about Scripture. And if you are one of the people in this community who has walked through a divorce, I want to say it explicitly. Jesus does not think less of you. And neither do we, your church family. There's something that I think this passage has in common with the passages we discussed last week, those about anger and adultery. I think we're back in a spot where people in Jesus' day are wondering, what is okay? Where is the line. They're asking how close they can get to this line while still technically obeying God. And since the law tells them that if you divorce your wife, you have to provide a certificate, it seems like there are people who feel like as long as they have the paperwork in order, they are free to just dissolve a marriage at any time for any reason. And I believe that Jesus does not want to pile on hurt for those people who have felt the very real pain of a marriage ending. But Jesus knows, just like we do now, that divorce has this really terrible way of just flinging shrapnel out into the community. It has a way of getting other people caught in the crossfire. A lot of people can get caught up in pain, and the hurt can spread pretty wide in the community. And Jesus wants us to understand that the fabric binding the people of God together must come first. Like I mentioned earlier, I think that Jesus is working towards his teaching on oaths, on the commitments that we make to each other and to God. So we'll come back to talking about marriage. I want us to start thinking about this other strange passage. Now, you may have noticed our culture has a very strange relationship to truth. In the year 2016, the Oxford Dictionary's word of the year was post-truth. Here's their definition. Post-truth is an adjective relating to or denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. And doesn't that line up pretty well with what you've seen in the world over the last few years? People are much more concerned with what feels true to them, what their personal truth is. That they're much more concerned with themselves, with their worldview, with the story that they use to narrate the world around them than they are with what we can derive from facts or consensus. And I truly don't think that most of us do that maliciously. I think with some notable exceptions, most people really do try to live from a place of authenticity. I believe that most people like to think that they are honest, that they're people of integrity. And there have actually been a bunch of studies done about this to sort of test human goodness, asking the question of how much do people really lie or cheat or steal, things like that. And the answer may surprise you, because the answer is not a lot. And the answer isn't even as much as they can get away with. Broadly speaking, most people will only steal as much as they can do while still convincing themselves that what they are doing is not bad. While still convincing themselves that they are good people. Most people will only lie enough to be able to convince themselves that it actually wasn't that harmful of a lie. This may strike you as strange, but think with me for a second. Most of us would probably never think of walking into a Target and grabbing a television and leaving without paying. Even if somehow we were pretty sure we'd get away with it, a lot of us have that little voice in our head that says, this is wrong, this doesn't belong to me. But when you get in a fender bender, for example, and the other person is at fault, when their insurance is asking you questions, when they ask you about that chip in the paint or the dent or the broken taillight that's been that way for months and months, how many of us might fudge a little and say that, no, the accident caused that? So we get it fixed on the big company's dime and not ours. What's the harm in that? It can't be that bad. They're clearly doing fine, money-wise. What about when you leave the grocery checkout line and you realize they forgot to charge you for one or two items? Is any of us really hopping back in line to go pay for those items? I had an English class my second year of college, American literature. We got assigned some pretty big, heavy reading in that class. And on the second day of class, we walk in and we're handed a quiz. And that quiz had one question on it. What percentage of the assigned reading did you do for today's class? And whatever number you answered was the grade you got on that quiz. The first quiz of the semester. How many of us would tell the truth if you really didn't get around to doing the reading, but you were going to? Maybe you would do it later that day. All of us have these little tiny ways of bending the truth. And we're usually pretty good about doing it in a way that makes us feel like what we're doing is okay when you think about it. Usually our justification nowadays is that we're just protecting people's feelings, or we're just trying to be nice. Sometimes the truth can hurt feelings. We don't want to do that. We're Jesus followers. We're loving and kind people, after all. When we were kids, do you remember how we used to get around telling the truth? We had that way of saying something we didn't actually mean, but it was okay because we were crossing our fingers. And the people of Jesus' day had a way to do this too. Their version of crossing their fingers was to just not swear by anything important at all. When it comes to the big things, when I swear by something important, you can be assured that I am telling the truth. Jesus gives us the example of by heaven, or by the earth, or by Jerusalem, or even our lives. When I really need to convince you that I am honest, that I'm keeping my word, I will swear by something so profoundly sacred that you have to believe that what I am telling you is true. But every other time, when I don't do that, when I don't swear by these things, we just kind of have to gamble together that what I'm saying is actually true. And honestly, we still sort of do this. I swear to God. I swear on the grave of some relative. I swear on my life, may God strike me dead if I am lying. These are all consequences of living in a world that has a pretty flexible relationship with the truth, with the commitments that we make. Jesus looks at us, the kind of people who are pretty sure we're good people, the ones who are self-satisfied, the ones who are nice, well-liked, polite, play by the rules. And he asks, what if we were different? What if we got to the heart of the issue? What if we cut everything unnecessary out of our speech, of our actions? And what if we lived in the truth? What if we got rid of the words that aren't completely necessary to getting the point across? Jesus says, if you are going to follow me, if you are going to do this the Jesus way, if you are going to be citizens of the kingdom of heaven, you have got to be people that are relentlessly truthful. You have to turn yourselves into people who have the reputation of being so unwaveringly honest that we can cut out all the extras, all the unnecessaries. And we can just answer any question, any request with yes or no. Because people will recognize in us that when we say yes, we mean yes. When we say no, we mean no. So here's how I see these two passages tying together. Jesus expects his people to have unimpeachable integrity. If you make a commitment that is law, you honor it. You become the kind of person who others know without a shadow of a doubt that they can rely on. And if that sounds too hard, if that sounds impossible, maybe we as a people are over-committed. We've tried to say yes too much, and now things are falling through the cracks. The path towards being people of integrity is actually not to begin making more commitments to people. I think the path is to make less. It's to be conscious of the hundreds of little ways that we bind ourselves to people. We need to start treating our commitments like sacred oaths, like something holy, and unbreakable, because that's how Jesus expects us to treat them. Because in a world of cheap maybes, of easy commitments, of transactional relationships, Jesus wants our commitments to mean something. He wants our marriages to mean something. I think he wants our marriages to reflect the love that God has for his people. Self-sacrificial, self-emptying, humble, and all-encompassing, never failing. This is something you work at between two people over a lifetime. It's not something that comes easy. And if you answer a question, you say yes or you say no, but that's all you say. That's all you need to say, because you will be a person who is known for shooting straight, who is known for integrity. And what if we took this even further? Because when I was reflecting on this week, even as I was writing this sermon, I was still wondering, what lies are okay? What can I do to get away with it? What circumstances make it all right for me to be a little dishonest with my loved ones? And I want to remind you, our discussion from last week, Jesus just isn't interested in these types of questions. Jesus is much more concerned with how close we can get to the heart of the law. He's much more interested in whether we are people who are willing to follow him more closely into the reality that the law was always about, loving God with our entire beings and loving our neighbor as ourselves. So maybe the question isn't how honest should we be with our words. Maybe the question is, what words are actually necessary for me to love my neighbor? What if we spoke only what love required of us? I have a suspicion that we wouldn't be talking nearly as much as we do now. But this is a challenge of being a Jesus follower. This is how he wants us to think. It's about how we can dwell with him at the center. It's about how we can filter our every thought and word and action through the lens of love. When we sign on to follow Jesus, there's some pretty big changes that have to take place. As we go forward, as we leave this place, we all have some pretty tough homework for the week. We are tasked with becoming people of integrity, people of honesty, people of fewer words who use those words for truth and for love. And so this week, I want you to start taking stock. How many commitments are you making for yourself in a week? What jobs, plans, and events are you signing yourself up for? And are there any that fall through the cracks? I also want us to take stock of the little ways that we bend the truth a little bit, ways that we fudge, ways that we tell half-truths, ways we cross our fingers so that we're off the hook. I think we might be surprised how often we're actually doing this, and we just aren't noticing because it's built into our culture. It's okay to tell those little lies if they're for other people's feelings. It's okay to lie to make things a little easier on people. Sometimes we even lie to ourselves, but there's no two ways about it. Jesus demands truth. He says himself, he is the truth. I have to admit that I think I want to be that church. The church where you know without a shadow of a doubt that someone is answering your question with honesty, even if that question is something as small as, how are you today? That church where if someone commits to doing something, then you may as well have their signature on a legal contract. That is how sure you are that they are going to do what they said. What if we were that people who refused to deal in partial truth, in post-truth, but instead passionately chased after Jesus as the only truth? It is honesty and integrity that will help us live into Jesus' command to love our neighbor as ourselves. As we walk the Jesus way, as we leave here today, as we come down off the mountain, let's walk in truth. Will you join me now as we stand and sing and praise our God together? By the power of Christ, we have been called children of God. And as children of God, may we walk in the light, walk in the truth. May we be a people of integrity and honesty, so that we may reflect the goodness, the light, and the truth of the God that we serve. Go in peace.